My talk today is about dignity in design. And as mentioned, I'm an architect by training. I've always been fascinated watching people, experience design in the world around them. I believe design functions like the soundtrack that we're not always aware is even playing. And it sends us subconscious messages about how to feel and what to expect. So on a bright and sunny day in November 2013, my wife and I entered a hospital in Berkeley, California. We had responsibly toured the birthing center in advance, but we were both somehow still startled to find ourselves in a space that we would spend the better part of the next few days. It was a windowless room like this, and it had no hint of the bright, sunny day that we had left when we entered. Machines beeped inexplicably as the day turned into night. I struggled to find a comfortable chair to sit in while my wife rested and the contractions increased. A clock was perched directly in eyesight of my wife as she was laying in the bed to watch every second tick by. And if anyone's had a baby, which I have not, you know that those are harrowing moments. Those seconds feel like a long time. And to just think that no one had the foresight to imagine that that clock would provide some stress for the woman, in this case my wife, giving birth, was pretty weird, pretty strange. In our 3 days there, we were well cared for by the hospital staff, but it was an otherwise unusually isolating experience. We literally did not meet a single other parent or baby in our time in this birthing center. We went in and we came out. The space we in seemed completely misaligned with the moment that we were experiencing, welcoming our daughter, a human being, into the world. When I casually commented on the design of our labor and recovery rooms to a nurse, she paused and said, "I always think to myself, I wish I had become an architect because I could design this room better." And I said to her, "You realize an architect did design this room." So, if not for the patient of the hospital or for the staff of the hospital, who was this room, a room like this, designed for? It's a question that I still can't find an answer to. So despite the immense joy of our daughter's birth, the messages of that hospital room stick with me and my wife to this day. At best, this particular room could be described as uninspiring, but at worst, it's undignifying. And I mention it not as a call for sympathy. I just mention it because none of us, no matter where we are in the world, even in a developed country like this and in a place like California in the Bay Area, none of us are immune from bad design. So in that moment, when my wife was laying in the bed and I was standing beside her, in some cases holding her hand, we literally found ourselves wanting for a hospital and a hospital room that we had visited in rural Rwanda, on the other side of the world. It was this hospital. It's called the Butaro Hospital. It's perched on what was a contested hillside during the country's civil war, otherwise known as the genocide. And yet, there was this palpable calm and peacefulness of that hospital. The wards were bathed in natural light. Each bed faced out a window. It was built with local labor and local materials for a fraction of the cost of Rwanda's other district hospitals, made with the hands of women like this, who became masons and are now some of the most sought-after masons in the region. Up until the hospital opened, there was no hospital in this district of over 340,000 people. It's now considered one of the finest health facilities in Africa. Operated by the global nonprofit organization and NGO Partners in Health, its founder is famous for saying, "If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere." It was actually designed by a group of students who were then at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and have gone on to create a remarkable nonprofit practice called Mass Design Group. And for that reason, I'm very comfortable saying this is one of the most significant buildings of our generation. It rocks some of my fundamental beliefs. It changed the way I view design. I had been steeped in projects like it for my whole career, but most were aspirational at best. They had never been done at this same scale. This was a full hospital, no longer a shipping container clinic or some small project that was super well-intentioned, but never going to operate in a way that a permanent building like this could. The first time I saw it, it took my breath away. It literally reduced me to tears. So I went to architecture because I thought this is what architecture was about: designing in building spaces for people, all people, to live their best life. And what I've found is that architecture is an overwhelmingly white, male, elitist profession, seemingly oblivious from some of the world's greatest needs. Of course, there are exceptions, like Mass Design Group and other practices around the country and here in the Bay Area, but that's what they remain, exceptions. So I believe so strongly in design because I believe it has a unique ability to dignify. It can make people feel valued, cared for, comfortable, seen, honored, and respected. That's dignity. And yet, when we think of spaces that make us feel exactly the opposite, uncomfortable, unsafe, insecure, insignificant, those places are much more abundant, in fact, than the ones that make us feel dignified. To make matters worse, most people don't realize that they have much agency over the spaces that they live in, that they work in, and that they play in. In most cases, they don't, but they should. We all should. So I think back often to that hospital in Rwanda and the people that I met there, the patients, the doctors, the nurses. They all beamed with pride about this place, and having been there, I understand why. So I set about trying to identify other projects like it, but in other locales around the world, not just in Rwanda, not just in Africa, including here in the United States. And I ended up writing this book called Design for Good, which I'd love to tell you a little bit about today. It was a book that I needed to read. So if you know anything about the architecture press, you know that there is a disproportionate amount of ink spilled on designers' intentions, with comparatively little, if any, on the experiences of clients and users. I find that odd and short-sighted. You see, I've come to understand that buildings are about people and people are about stories. The people I met over the past 2 years that I wrote this book, they've stuck with me. I've interviewed over 100 people from all walks of life, and they, to me, speak directly to the dignifying power of design. So I listened to a resident of this cottage community in Texas. It was designed specifically for the 50 most chronically homeless people in the Dallas area. Each one of them got their own beautiful 400 square foot cottage. It had everything they needed when they walked in the door. The resident that I interviewed for the book talked about having been homeless for 30 years, drifting from town to town, sleeping on the street, or occasionally in the cab of a truck when he worked for a moving company. He now has a key that he described to me in detail, and that key enters a door. And he's able to open the door and walk into this place that is entirely his. And importantly, for anyone that's lived on the street, he's able to lock that door and feel secure. He describes it simply as heaven. I listened to a teenager who had lived on the streets of Nakuru, Kenya, a city with an elevation of 6,000 feet, with cold nights. He told me what it's like to wake up in a warm bed and to look through those wood slats and see the sun rising. He's with other children at an orphanage there called the St. Jerome's Children's Center. And I listened to a 65-year-old former truck driver named Bruce, who told me in his one-bedroom apartment in the Lakeside Senior Apartments off Lake Merritt that he had been living out of his car and on the street for over 5 years. I could feel his pride as he told me about being elected the neighborhood watch captain of his building. And I could see the care he took to make his bed every single morning. He loves his apartment. I believe that dignity is to design what justice is to law and health is to medicine. For me, in the simplest of terms, it's about having your value reflected back, that the spaces and places that you are in were made for you and were made to make you feel comfortable. So a few years ago, I improbably found myself seated in front of this woman. Her name is Joyce Banda, and she was the president of Malawi at the time. It's a country in East Africa. She was literally seated on a throne in front of me. I was terribly intimidated. I'm a kid from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and all I wanted to do was go home at that point. But I was brought to Malawi because it was struggling with an issue that may seem unrelated to design. It had the second worst maternal mortality rating in the world, second only to Sierra Leone. The president had seen women like these who would take shelter in abandoned buildings adjacent to clinics and hospitals just to be closer to critical care, should they need it if there were any complications with their birth. So these are women, the type of women that I met with. This particular building was abandoned. It was this brick building, one story. There was smoke soot coming around all the windows that had been blown out. And there were cook stoves inside to show that women had been using those to either keep warm or to cook. And the toxicity of that alone is really problematic. But to think that they're all sleeping on this hard floor, on these thin mats, with these rusty buckets as pots, and they didn't even know when their babies were going to come. They could be there for days or even weeks. So President Banda made a commitment to build 150 of what she called maternity waiting homes. These have been used in other countries across Africa. This is the government-issued maternity waiting home. There were seven of them under construction or completed by the time that we were there doing our visit. And they were made with red brick that was imported from outside of the area. They were most often made by contractors from outside the area. They had very small windows, allowing very little natural light and ventilation, and they were very dark. They actually, when you went inside, it was pure concrete, and it literally felt like a horse stable. And I was thinking, this is where these women are waiting to go through one of the most significant moments of their life. There has to be a better way. So when I was finally asked to brief the president and her cabinet and all these international aid leaders, I commended them really genuinely that this is a significant project, but I also think there's a better way. And I showed them an example of this hospital. And I showed it to them because it's in another part of Africa, a region they can relate with. I showed it to them because it had responsibly engaged local labor and local materials. I showed it to them because it dignifies. When I started presenting the images on a very small TV screen that they had set up, people no doubt were squinting when they looked at it, but I heard audible gasps. They'd literally never seen or imagined a building like this in the same way that I hadn't. And so I came back home to the US and I put a bunch of pieces together, some foundation funding, the access to this firm called Mass Design Group, and I made these connections. I made sure everyone was on the same page, and then I effectively stepped back. I was playing the role of a connector. 2 years later, with a few updates in between, I got a chance to see what they had done together after I had exited the scene, and I'd love to share that with you now. that's the maternity waiting village in rural Malawi. It's unequivocally the most meaningful project of my life, and my experience of it was incredibly momentary. But it was raising people's expectations, in this case the president of a country, but also the Ministry of Health, the aid workers who work there, and now the women that have been a part of it. It's just such a vibrant, beautiful place. So in my new book, that Butaro hospital in Rwanda and this maternity waiting village in Malawi serve as bookends. And in between, I took great pains to show other projects that I hope are even more relatable to people. This may look like a fancy, I don't know what, law firm, doctor's office, whatever it might be, but this is actually a free clinic in rural Arkansas for people who are uninsured. It's a beautiful space that was designed for dignity. This is a building on Skid Row in Los Angeles that provides housing for people who had been literally living on the streets before they moved in here. It has supported services. It has everything that these people who are transitioning to a more stable place would need. And it's operated by the Skid Row Housing Trust and was designed by Michael Maltzin Architecture. This is a space in rural Rwanda, again, designed for women, called the Women's Opportunity Center by Sharon Davis Design. And you just look at this, one of 17 pavilions that were built with over 500,000 bricks that these women pressed themselves. And this is a space that was designed for them, this comfortable, safe circle to learn in together. And then a final project in the civic area is the Atlanta Beltline. If you've heard of the High Line in New York, this is like a much longer and much lower cost version of that. It's a beautiful project that stretches 22 miles around the entire city of Atlanta. And it's a remarkable project that we're seeing the fruits of to this day, still under construction. So I wrote this book, of course, to inspire other designers to design more with dignity. I wanted to share a few lessons with designers first. First and foremost, not a single one of the projects in this book was designed on a pro bono basis. And if you know anything about me, you know that I used to be perhaps one of the biggest advocates of pro bono design in the country. My first book was literally called The Power of Pro Bono. So that is a major learning for me. But what I found is that in order for these projects to happen, in order for these projects to be taken seriously on all sides and to happen in a timely manner, the fees benefited the projects. And so they were not done on a pro bono basis. They also weren't done by a very common thing in the architecture and design world, competitions, where there's a call like, send us your best ideas for this, that, or the other thing. And a lot of us flood to those or flock to those. And we see the fruits of those very infrequently. So these projects were not done by that. They instead were built on reputations and on relationships. And finally, all of these projects turned constraints into opportunities. They were super low budget. They were very complicated circumstances, in many cases without access to labor and materials at first glance. Those things had to be created in order to make these things happen, but as a result, they built local economies. But I also wrote this book for non-designers. I want everyday people to awaken to the power and the potential of design. First and foremost, this is not something that we're told or ever educated about. You deserve good design. And yet, so much of our world is not well designed. And as a result, we all have a right to demand more, to expect more. And this is not just about us, of course. This is about everyone. Everyone deserves good design. In closing, I just want to share what inspired me to write this book. It really operates on two levels. On one level, my motivation is deeply pragmatic. I want to change the practice of architecture and design. I want to alter how we build. I want to alter what we build with. And I want to alter who we build for. On another level, I'm a believer in the power of design to change lives and to bring dignity to average people, the disenfranchised, the poor, and all of us. Well-designed spaces are not just a matter of taste or a question of aesthetics. They literally shape our ideas of who we are, what we are worth, and what we deserve in the world. That is the essence of dignity, and both the opportunity and the responsibility of design, for good and for all. Thank you so much.